Ye never understood this universal obsession with cinema. What's so special about it? You sit for 2 hours in the dark, stare at the screen, and then leave forgetting what the movie was even about. But my wife Linda and her mother Jane were true movie buffs. They could spend hours discussing new films, arguing about directorial techniques and acting performances. For them, cinema wasn't just entertainment, but a way of life. They were especially drawn to all sorts of art house and independent films. The more abstruse and incomprehensible, the better. I would sometimes jokingly ask if they wanted to go to Cannes or Sundance, to which they would only sigh dreamily. And recently, Linda and Jane completely lost their heads. They stumbled upon an advertisement for some 3-day independent film festival in Greece. All they could talk about now was this incredible opportunity to immerse themselves in the world of auteur cinema, see rare films, and meet the creators themselves. "Thomas, you just can't imagine how grand this event is," Linda chirped at dinner, her eyes shining. "Such festivals are a paradise for lovers of real, profound cinema." "Oh yes, they will be showing films that you won't see anywhere else," Jane chimed in, rolling her eyes dreamily. "It's a chance to touch the very heart of cinematic art." I merely chuckled good-naturedly, devouring my steak. If the women want to have a cultured time, who am I to interfere with their happiness? Especially since I myself did not fancy the idea of dragging myself to Greece for the sake of some movies. "Well, great girls, go ahead, have fun," I winked, saluting with a glass of wine. "I'll guard the house and Baxter, and take a break from your movie talk." Linda playfully kicked me under the table, while Jane just smiled condescendingly. They were used to my frivolous attitude towards their sacred passion, but this time I could see that both were seized by a real excitement. No wonder, it's not every day you get a chance to plunge headlong into your beloved element. The very next day, Linda booked them both tickets to all the festival screenings. They decided to wait with the plane tickets. There was more than a week before departure. No need to rush. Now all the talk in the house revolved solely around the upcoming event. What films would be shown, which directors would come, how profound and intellectual the discussions after the screenings would be. I kept quiet, not wanting to dampen the ardor of the dear women. After all, everyone has their quirks. Some collect stamps, some go fishing, and some demand cinema. The main thing is that they are happy. But fate, as you know, loves to present surprises. And not always pleasant ones. And 2 days before the departure, such a surprise struck like a bolt from the blue. Linda fell ill. She caught some terrible flu and took to bed with a high fever. The poor thing was delirious, coughing and sneezing so hard the walls shook. What trip could we talk about in this condition? "God, what bad luck!" Linda almost wept, blowing her nose into a handkerchief. "I've been waiting for this festival for so long, and now it's all for nothing. What a misfortune!" Jane sat next to her daughter, soothingly stroking her back. Although she herself looked no better, pale, haggard, no wonder so much anticipation, and then bang, a bummer at the last moment. Now, darling, don't be upset," Jane cooed, although the bitterness was clearly audible in her voice. "Health is more important. We'll go another time." "There won't be another time," Linda sobbed. "Such festivals happen once a year, if not less often. There may not be another chance." She was right about that. But what can you do? You can't drag yourself to Greece with a fever of almost 40. It's good that we didn't rush with the plane tickets. At least we won't have to lose money. And then Linda suddenly raises her tear-reddened eyes to me and says, "Listen, Tom, maybe you could go with Mom, since it's not meant for me." I nearly fell off my chair in surprise. "Me? At an auteur film festival? Are you kidding me?" "Linda, honey, are you delirious by any chance?" I carefully clarified, feeling her forehead. "I don't know a thing about this cinema stuff. I'll only spoil Jane's fun." But my wife clung to me with a death grip. Her feverishly shining eyes were pleading. "Oh, please, Tom, Mom can't go alone. She's an introvert, and what's so hard for you to sit through the screenings and then nod along in the discussions?" she asked, sniffling. "Consider it a gift to me, and to Mom, too." I shifted my gaze to Jane. She looked confused and embarrassed. It was clear that she too was not thrilled by such a turn of events, but there seemed to be no choice. Either she and I go, or her festival tickets will be wasted too. "Well, if Jane doesn't mind, I'll think about it," I said uncertainly. My mother-in-law smiled strainedly and looked down. I'm uncomfortable bothering you, Thomas, but it really would be hard for me alone, she admitted. Can you handle being a companion and a conversationalist? I nodded valiantly. After all, what did I have to lose? I'll watch some smart cinema for once, pontificate a bit, maybe I'll even like it. No problem, Jane. Consider me your personal assistant for this time, I winked, trying to lighten the mood. I'll try not to embarrass myself too much with my movie ignorance. I promise to at least pretend to be interested. Linda and Jane laughed together, and that settled it. 2 days later, my mother-in-law and I boarded a plane together, heading for Greece and its vaunted film fest. Who would have thought I'd ever find myself in such a role? If someone had told me just a week ago that I would voluntarily go to an independent film festival, and with my mother-in-law as a companion at that, I would have just laughed. What kind of film buff am I? And Jane and I had never really talked much one-on-one, mostly at family gatherings. And now here we are, a cultural trip, intellectual conversations. I felt, to put it mildly, out of my element. Seeing my confusion, Linda began to fervently persuade me, "Thomas, my dear, why are you being so stubborn? This is such a chance to watch truly worthwhile films, to enrich yourself spiritually," she urged, blowing her nose into a handkerchief. "It will only do you good, you'll see. Expand your horizons." "Yeah, I won't even fit into that horizon afterwards," I grumbled, grinning. "Where do I, a simple salesman, fit in with your abstruse talk of montage stitching and intra-frame conflict?" But Linda was adamant. She batted her eyelashes, looked me in the eyes, almost threw herself at my feet. And eventually I gave in. Really, why not go? I'll be the perfect son-in-law, keep my mother-in-law company. Maybe I'll even learn something. "All right, you've convinced me, you silver-tongued little devil," I mock-grumbled, kissing my wife on her hot forehead. "So be it. I'll get a little cultured. Maybe I'll at least get a discount at the video rental store as an art house regular." Linda beamed and hugged me tightly. Then she turned to her mother and smiled ingratiatingly. "Mom, you don't mind, do you? Thomas is a great guy, you'll see. Never a dull moment with him." Jane adjusted her hair embarrassedly and smiled uncertainly. It was clear that the prospect of spending a few days alone with her son-in-law didn't inspire her much either. We had always been polite and friendly to each other, but there was no particular closeness. And to be side by side at a film festival like that, it was unthinkable. "Well, if Thomas doesn't object, then neither do I," Jane answered diplomatically, throwing a quick glance at me. "I'm sure we'll find common ground. After all, we have one big passion in common." "And what is that?" I wondered. "What do you mean?" "Linda, of course," Jane laughed, and I couldn't help but smile. "Indeed, the main thing is that we both love my wife, so we'll get along somehow, even if it means pretending to be a connoisseur of auteur cinema and having smart conversations until morning. For the happiness of my beloved wife, I'm ready for anything." So for the next 2 days, Jane and I diligently prepared for the trip. We bought plane tickets, booked a hotel, made a cultural program. Or rather, my mother-in-law took care of that. I mostly kept quiet and nodded, pretending to understand at least something in her talk of the new wave of Greek cinema and the revolutionary vision of avant-garde directors. Linda did not get out of bed, pumping herself with medication and plaintively sniffling. But even in sickness, she never tired of giving us valuable instructions. "Mom, just don't forget to take a notebook and pen to write down the most interesting things. And supply Tom, too. Let him train his memory," she commanded. "And in the evening, be sure to discuss what you've seen over a glass of wine. That's the best way to understand a movie." At that last remark, Jane and I just exchanged knowing glances, hiding our smiles. Wine and movies, huh? Well, at least I'm familiar with alcohol, unlike art house. There will be something to lean on in smart conversations. And then the day of reckoning came. My mother-in-law and I loaded into a cab, waved goodbye to the bedridden Linda, and sped off to the airport. The mood was strange, exciting, and at the same time awkward. After all, it was the first time alone on a long trip, without the usual buffer of my wife and other relatives. "Well, off to adventure," I announced cheerfully, settling into the airplane seat next to Jane. "Adventures of the mind and soul," my mother-in-law corrected me, smiling meaningfully. The flight to Athens was surprisingly calm and even pleasant. I was a little afraid that Jane and I would feel awkward and have nothing to talk about, But my fears were unfounded. As soon as the plane took off, my companion perked up and began enthusiastically describing the upcoming festival. "You can't even imagine, Thomas, how significant this event is in the world of cinema," she said ardently, her eyes shining. "Such a concentration of masterpieces, such names, and the opportunity to communicate with the creators of the films themselves, that's just priceless." I listened with half an ear, mostly admiring my mother-in-law's enthusiastic face. I must admit, enthusiasm became her very well. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes sparkled with playful sparkles, and her hands fluttered in the air, as if trying to paint invisible pictures. I even admired her a little. It turns out that Jane can be very sweet and lively when overflowing with emotions. "And tell me, Thomas," she suddenly caught herself, turning to me, "what do you think of auteur cinema yourself? Do you have any favorite directors, movies?" For a moment I was taken aback, not knowing what to answer. To tell the truth, I had a very vague idea of how auteur cinema differs from ordinary cinema. Well, a particular director shoots, puts in his vision. So what? Aren't blockbusters the same? "Well, you know, Jane, I don't really understand all these subtleties," I began cautiously, scratching my head. "For me, cinema is just entertainment, a way to relax after work. So I haven't seen much of the auteur stuff. Only Tarantino, I guess, and Nolan. That's auteur cinema, right?" Jane laughed merrily, causing radiant wrinkles to gather around her eyes. I couldn't help but admire her. Oh my, how sincere passion transforms a person. "Oh, Thomas, you're killing me. Tarantino is certainly an original director, but you can't call it auteur cinema," she explained, laughing. "Auteur cinema is usually festival cinema, not aimed at a wide audience. It's more complex in form and content, explores human nature more deeply." "Ah, now I understand why I get sleepy from such movies," I chuckled. "They don't make them for average minds, I see." "Bite your tongue," Jane exclaimed in mock indignation, slapping my hand. "Never mind. I'll make you an appreciator of cinema yet, you'll see." "Oh, no need to make anything out of me. I'm fine as I am." I pretended to be frightened. "Better tell me what kind of movies await us at the festival. At least I'll prepare myself mentally." And Jane was happy to explain. For the rest of the way, she initiated me into the world of independent cinema, told me about cult directors and landmark films. I didn't understand much, but her enthusiasm itself was captivating and engrossing. At one point, I caught myself thinking that I was enjoying listening to this passionate babble, admiring my companion's radiant face. Wow, I never thought I'd share Jane's passion. Jane suddenly fell silent in mid-sentence and coughed in embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I must have talked your ear off," she smiled guiltily. "Got a little carried away. You must be tired of my chatter." "Not at all," I objected hotly. "I find it very interesting to listen to you. I never thought that cinema was such a special world, with its own laws and legends. You've really opened my eyes." And I wasn't dissembling. Jane's excitement had infected me too, and now I myself was eagerly anticipating immersion in this new universe. And also, it suddenly occurred to me, I was anticipating the opportunity to communicate more with my mother-in-law in an informal setting. Who knows? Maybe it will bring us closer in a new way. Although what intimacy could we talk about? After all, the mother of my wife was sitting in front of me. And yet the thought of closeness with Jane did not seem as absurd as before. Looking at her inspired face, listening to her velvety voice, I felt a strange, tickling feeling stirring inside me. Similar to interest, only directed not at the movies, but at my beautiful companion. However, I quickly dismissed these thoughts. Well, who in my place would not admire a beautiful, passionate woman? It doesn't mean anything, just aesthetic pleasure and nothing more. After all, I can't really fancy my mother-in-law, can I? With these thoughts, I dozed off to the steady hum of the plane, while Jane continued to chirp enthusiastically about the intricacies of the language of cinema. And in my half-sleep, I imagined a sunny beach, a refreshing breeze, and the mysterious silhouette of a woman in the distance. A woman who suspiciously resembled my wife's mother. The first thing that struck me about Greece was the light, bright, blinding, as if pouring from the sky in streams. It flooded everything around. The white houses, the string of ancient streets, the azure sea on the horizon. After gloomy Chicago, it seemed almost unreal, as if I had landed on another planet. "Oh my God, Thomas, just look!" Jane gasped admiringly beside me, looking around. It's just a paradise for a filmmaker. Such light, such textures. Here nature itself seems to create the perfect picture. I nodded, though I didn't understand much of what she said. Just the serenity that was poured around tuned me to a lyrical mood. I wanted to wander these magical streets, soaking up the beauty, talking about the sublime. Even the upcoming film festival no longer seemed like such a bad idea. However, as soon as we registered and received our participant badges, things started happening that were no time for lyricism. Crowds of people, queues for screenings, constant running from hall to hall. Just keep up. Jane fluttered like a bee, dragging me everywhere with her. Now she'd drag me to a discussion. Now she'd drag me to a meeting with a director. I could barely keep up, my eyes just scattering from the abundance of unfamiliar faces and pretentious outfits. Look, it's Yorgos Lanthimos himself, Jane whispered in my ear, flushed with delight. The one who made The Lobster and The Favorite. My God, I'm going to faint. Yeah, of course, I recognized him right away, I muttered, feverishly trying to remember who this Lanthimos was and what he had made. Something about people lobsters, I think, but I was already ashamed to admit my ignorance. I didn't want to seem like an ignoramus to my mother-in-law, to disappoint her, so I had to maneuver, getting away with generalities like very conceptual and what an unconventional imagery. Jane didn't seem to dig, carried away by what was happening. So the first day of the festival flew by like in a fog. We must have watched about 5 films, and from most of them, I only had scraps of memories. Some artsy episodes, strange dialogues causing either bewilderment or anxiety. My head was spinning from this cacophony of images and meanings, against which even the most twisted blockbuster would have seemed like a child's nursery rhyme. But Jane was in her element. She discussed what she saw with burning eyes, fervently arguing about the details with other viewers. I remember, after another showing of some chthonic horror movie, she suddenly turned to me and blurted out, "Did you notice, Thomas, how elegantly the director used the space of the frame? It's pure Antonioni, minimum means, maximum expression. Brilliant, isn't it?" I had no idea who Antonioni was or what the brilliance was, but I nodded just in case. And then suddenly Jane leaned very close to me and whispered conspiratorially, "You know, I'm so glad you're here with me. It's much nicer to watch movies in company to share impressions. Linda and I have never been able to talk like this, heart to heart." And she winked slyly at me, which made something suddenly lurch in my stomach. I felt myself blushing and blurted out irrelevantly, Yes, I'm very glad too. It's great that Linda got sick and couldn't go, isn't it?" And immediately bit my tongue. What nonsense am I talking about? I've completely lost my tact against the background of this movie frenzy. But Jane just laughed merrily and slapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Bite your tongue! What does Linda have to do with it? I'm talking about you and me," she playfully scolded, and suddenly added more quietly, "And I like your company too, Thomas, very much." After which she took my arm and whisked me off to the next section, and I plodded behind, stunned by her words and touches. Inside, everything was singing and trembling, like from a good sip of champagne. My mother-in-law's words wouldn't leave my head, making me nervous and imagining God knows what. But no, it's some kind of nonsense. Jane is just being polite, showing friendly participation. No need to invent too much out of thin air. And yet I kept replaying that short dialogue in my head over and over again, clinging to the intonations, to the playful gleam in her green eyes. So, in thought and confusion, the first day at the festival ended. When we finally got to the hotel, I collapsed on the bed with relief, feeling completely exhausted. My head was spinning from the abundance of new information. My eyes were drooping. But my heart was pounding like crazy, losing its rhythm every now and then at the thought of Jane. "How are you, Thomas, alive?" my mother-in-law asked sympathetically, looking into my room. "Not overstrained by such mental activity?" She smiled jokingly, but there was genuine concern in her eyes. This attention suddenly made me feel so good and calm that I was ready to cry. "Yes, I seem to be breathing so far," I wearily joked back. "But tomorrow you'll finish me off with your auteur cinema, that's for sure. Too concentrated a dose of art house." "It's all right, it's only good for you," Jane winked. Consider it an intensive art therapy course. You'll thank me yourself later." And with those words, she affectionately ruffled my hair and retired to her room. And I lay awake for a long time, trying to make sense of my own feelings. My thoughts were confused, jumping from the film festival to my mother-in-law and back again. I had absolutely no idea what was happening to me. Was I really beginning to feel an attraction to Jane? And at such an inopportune moment? So, in doubt and conjecture, I fell asleep. And in the morning, everything started up again. Breakfast, cues, halls, discussions, interviews. The whirlwind of faces and events captured me completely, leaving almost no time for reflection. Only in short breaks between screenings did Jane and I exchange a couple of phrases, and each time I caught her long, searching gaze, it sent shivers down my spine and a pleasant warmth spread through my chest. But the real shock awaited me on the third day of the festival. That evening they were showing a new film by some fashionable Greek. I didn't really remember the title or the director's name. I only remember that the picture was very strange, gloomy, and surreal. About an unemployed actor who goes crazy with loneliness and begins to imagine himself as different characters. Sitting in the dark hall, I desperately tried to grasp the concept, but in vain. Incoherent scenes flickered before my eyes, causing only bewilderment and anxiety. I was about to give up and doze off, but then I suddenly felt Jane take my hand. That touch struck me like lightning. I froze, afraid to move and scare away the magic of the moment. Her palm was warm, soft, and amazingly tender. Her fingers gently stroked my wrist, sending waves of trembling all over my body. I cautiously glanced sideways at Jane. She was staring intently at the screen, as if not noticing my confusion. Only the corners of her lips twitched in a barely noticeable smile. And then it suddenly dawned on me. She did it on purpose. Deliberately took my hand, perfectly aware of the effect. This thought made my head spin. I felt myself blushing in the dark, grateful for the gloom of the hall. Treacherously tugged at the bottom of my stomach. My breathing faltered. The rest of the film flew by in a haze. I saw and heard nothing around me, completely focused on the sensation of Jane's hand in mine. When the lights came on in the hall, we hastily recoiled from each other. A slight blush played on my mother-in-law's face, but otherwise she looked as usual, imperturbable and slightly ironic. I, on the other hand, was ready to sink through the floor with embarrassment and incomprehensible anticipation. "How did you like it?" she asked, as if nothing had happened, nodding at the screen. "I think it's stunning. What intensity of passion, what a raw nerve." I nodded, unable to utter a word. At that moment, I didn't give a damn about the movie or the festival. All my thoughts revolved only around Jane and her unexpected act. What was it? An accident, an innocent friendly gesture, or something more, a hint, an invitation? Later at the hotel, I couldn't stand it and plucked up the courage to ask directly. We were sitting on the balcony of her room, sipping cold white wine and admiring the sunset over the sea. Jane looked serene and somehow rejuvenated, as if glowing from within. "Listen, what was that today at the movies? Well, when you—" I mumbled, carefully looking away. Jane raised her eyebrows in surprise and then suddenly laughed softly. Her laughter was low, throaty, and terribly exciting. "Oh, you mean that?" She squinted slyly. "And what do you think yourself? Why would I do that?" I felt myself blushing to the roots of my hair. Dozens of options swarmed in my head, each more insane than the other. But I didn't have the courage to voice them out loud. Instead, I squeezed out something neutral. "Well, I don't know. Maybe you got scared of the movie, so you grabbed onto me in the dark?" Jane snorted and rolled her eyes theatrically, and then suddenly leaned forward, coming very close. Her green eyes sparkled with mirth and challenge. "So, in your opinion, I'm like an impressionable young lady who gets scared of thrillers?" she purred, running her finger along my arm. "No, darling, it's not like that at all." My mouth went dry. My heart was pounding like crazy. I myself did not understand what had come over me. After all, the mother of my wife was sitting in front of me. What the hell am I flirting with her for? What the hell am I falling for these ambiguous hints? But I couldn't back down now. I didn't want to. "Then how?" I breathed, looking Jane straight in the eye. "Why did you do it? Tell me honestly." She sighed and squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. and then suddenly leaned forward sharply and bit into my lips with a hot, demanding kiss. I gasped in surprise, but immediately responded. It was like in dreams, only 1,000 times sharper and brighter. Her lips were soft, insistent, crumpling mine with some desperate greed. Our tongues intertwined in a frenzied dance, hands roaming bodies as if trying to feel and remember every curve. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a minute, maybe an eternity. But when we finally tore ourselves away from each other, we were both breathing heavily and looking dazed, not believing what had happened. "That's why," Jane said quietly and firmly, looking me in the eye. "Because I like you, Thomas. I like you very much, and I can't hide it anymore." My head was spinning from her words and the soulful, serious tone. Inside, everything was singing and trembling, my mind refusing to believe in the reality of what was happening. I like Jane, my beautiful, smart, passionate mother-in-law. It seems that all my secret dreams and fantasies had suddenly come to life. "But what about Linda?" I stammered, trying to grasp at the remnants of common sense. "She's your daughter, and my wife. How can we—" Jane sharply put her finger to my lips, calling for silence. Something hard, almost cruel, flashed in her gaze. I know it's wrong and immoral, that we shouldn't, but I'm tired of pretending, Thomas," she whispered feverishly. "I'm tired of pretending there's nothing between us, that I haven't been crazy about you all these years." This confession nearly made my heart jump out. All these years? So Jane has long wanted me? While I was suffering here and tormented by remorse, she actually— "I'm not suggesting anything serious to you," Jane continued softly, stroking my cheek. "I understand that you love Linda and are unlikely to leave her. But now here, can't we just be ourselves, even if only for these few days?" Her green eyes looked with such a plea and hope that my chest ached. And how could I refuse her? How to resist these lips, this supple body, pressing so invitingly against me? To hell with morality, with duty, with family. Now I wanted only one thing, to possess this woman, to take what she herself offered me. So I just pulled her to me and hungrily bit into her lips. It wasn't even a kiss, but some kind of silent agreement, a seal cementing our forbidden union. Jane moaned softly into my mouth, tangling her fingers in my hair, rubbing her whole body. Then everything rushed like in a frenzy. We stumbled into the room, tearing clothes off each other on the go. I think I ripped her blouse, and the buttons bounced off the floor with a clatter, but we didn't care. Now we only wanted to get to the naked skin, to feel the heat of the desired body. We made love passionately, frenziedly, completely losing our heads. At one point I thought, this is it, the madness that movies are made about. When the whole world ceases to exist, there are only two, fused into one. We hardly got out of bed for the rest of the day, ignoring the festival and other worldly joys. Jane was insatiable. She took me again and again, as if afraid that I would suddenly disappear. I, on the other hand, drank her passion like a wanderer in the desert, languishing with thirst. We hardly talked, and why words when there is body language? Only when it was time to go home, reality suddenly poured in like an icy shower. The whole way back we were silent, sitting apart and not even touching each other, as if afraid that one touch would break the dam again. "Thank you, Thomas," Jane said softly at the airport, saying goodbye. "These days have been the best of my life. I will never forget them." I could see that she was barely holding back tears, and I myself had a lump the size of a watermelon in my throat. I wanted to hug her, kiss her, shout, "Don't go! Let's run away, start all over again." But I understood it would be better this way, for everyone. "Maybe someday," I began, but Jane interrupted me, shaking her head. "No, let's not give each other false hopes. What was will remain just a magical dream, a fairy tale that cannot last forever." She stroked my cheek with a sad smile and resolutely turned away. And in a moment she dissolved into the crowd, leaving me alone with the tearing pain in my heart. The first time at home was hellishly hard. To see Linda, to hug her, to pretend to be a happy husband and son-in-law. My soul was torn to pieces, and my body longed for Jane's touch. Several times I was tempted to drop everything, rush to her, pour out my feelings. But I stopped myself in time. No, I can't do that. There are things more important than personal happiness. Gradually, life fell into its usual rut. Work, home, holidays, Everything went on as usual. Jane and I behaved as if nothing had happened, politely, friendly, but with a slight detachment. Only sometimes I would catch her long, sad look and guess what she was thinking. We were united by a common past, a common secret, sweet and bitter at the same time. Of course, I could not forget what had been between us. Those magical moments in Greece were forever imprinted in my memory and heart. I often caught myself remembering Jane, her laughter, her touch, her frenzied passion in bed, and each time I had to pull myself together, remind myself of my duty to my family. However, everything secret sooner or later becomes apparent. And one day, Linda did suspect something. She began to ask more often how that ill-fated film festival had gone, why her mother and I were acting so strangely with each other. "Tom, I can see something's wrong," she persisted, looking me in the eye. "You and Mom seem to be avoiding each other. Did you quarrel over something there? Didn't get along?" Each time I wriggled out of it, made up plausible excuses. Like just the abundance of art house made my head spin, so I don't know how to behave. But Linda wouldn't let up, sensing something was wrong with a woman's heart. And so one day, she did arrange an interrogation for me. It happened on Thanksgiving, when the whole family gathered around the holiday table. Jane sat across from me, carefully avoiding my gaze, and Linda suddenly asked loudly, "Mom, what happened with you and Tom in Greece? You're both being so secretive, you don't want to tell." A ringing silence reigned at the table. Everyone was looking at me and Jane, waiting for an answer. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was it all about to be revealed now? Was our dark secret about to come out? But Jane didn't bat an eye. She took a sip of wine nonchalantly and gave her daughter a condescending look. "For God's sake, Linda, you just have to make a drama out of nothing. Nothing happened with me and Tom. Well, we had a couple of arguments about movies, didn't agree. Who doesn't?" And she winked slyly at me, as if inviting me to play along. I picked up with relief. Yes, I don't understand anything about this abstruse cinema, so I annoyed Jane with my movie ignorance. "Sorry if I offended you then." I turned to my mother-in-law with an apologetic smile. "It's okay, it happens to everyone," she chuckled, and everyone laughed together, diffusing the situation. I think our little staging worked. Linda calmed down, stopped asking questions, but I felt that her heart was still uneasy. Women's intuition is a thing stronger than logic and facts. However, we continued to keep our secret, sacred and jealously, like the apple of an eye. And what could we do? Confess everything? Destroy families? Cause pain to loved ones? No, it was unthinkable. Sometimes Jane and I would exchange glances, long, eloquent. They read both tenderness and longing and regret for what might have been. But we just smiled politely and turned away, keeping silence. Our forbidden love remained in the past, in sun-drenched Greece. Here and now, we were just relatives, almost strangers. I often think about those crazy days and wonder, what if everything had turned out differently? What if we had risked going against everyone, fighting for our happiness? Could we have been together, despite the sidelong glances and gossip? Alas, we'll never know now. Jane and I missed our chance, got scared, chickened out, and now we can only live with memories, cherish in our souls the image of that distant Greek fairy tale. I know she remembers too. By the way our eyes suddenly meet, by the way her fingers tremble, accidentally touching my hand. We are forever poisoned by each other, forever bound by an invisible thread, and nothing will change that now. Of course, life goes on. Home, work, family holidays, everything goes on as usual. Linda and I are even thinking about having a baby. It's about time. We're not getting any younger. Jane is busy babysitting her grandson, turning into the perfect grandmother. Outwardly, everything is fine and respectable, but I know that deep down she's pining, just like I am. We are two lonely islands in the middle of the sea of life, two lost wanderers who met too late on the road of life. Sometimes it seems to me, what if it's all fate? What if we were given this lesson, this test, for a reason? Maybe the point is to understand the value of true intimacy, to realize the importance of duty and self-sacrifice. I don't know the answer. I only know that I will never regret that magical Greek madness, those days and nights of absolute, all-consuming happiness. Even if it was short-lived, even if it was illusory, Jane and I are the keepers of this secret, unwitting conspirators. And even if we never confess our love to each other out loud, it will always be between us. A thin umbilical cord, an invisible connection of souls. Sleep well, my love. Keep our secret as sacred as I do. And if it suddenly becomes unbearable, just remember Greece. Remember our little big cinema. I will forever remain your viewer, your faithful admirer, even if secret. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.